And I remember I heard and I think I felt a little pop. As soon as the pop happened, the airplane attitude pitched down. That's not what I wanted to do, so you pull back on the yoke a little bit. But the attitude of the airplane didn't change. And at that point, I knew I was going to be landing somewhere.
You see souls and fuel remaining.
I don't know how much fuel I got, but I bet I got at least 1 or 2 quarts.
Air traffic control, mayday.
So you had 2 choices, to give up or fight for your life.
Told him I loved him, and I put the nose of the plane down into the canyon.
Rob Olsen-Drye, an airplane mechanic, splits his time between Homer and Bettles, Alaska, which is off the road system, meaning Rob relies on his piloting skills and his Piper Pacer to get him from point A to point B, like we in the lower 48 use a car, for reliable transportation and for fun.
I got my pilot's license because there's so much of Alaska that's untouchable unless you have an airplane. For instance, there's a place I love to go outside of Homer that's a 3 or 4 hour boat ride, and I can be there in 25 minutes. So I can get places quicker, I can go to places that other people can't or don't have the time to go to, and it allows me a little more freedom for adventure. I've probably 50 or 60 hours non-Alaska time, and yeah, the rest is all Alaska. I came up here and just started flying a lot. I think I put 125 hours on the first summer that I was here in a matter of 4 or 5 months.
But as Rob knows, not every flight goes according to plan.
So it was July 4th last year, just over a year ago. And the idea was I was going to fly from Bettles, north of Fairbanks, down to Homer, visit my friends and my wife for a long weekend and to enjoy 4th of July. I was also planning a hunt at the moment with a good friend of mine that lives here in Sterling, oddly enough. So I started flying fairly early in the day from Bettles and was lightly loaded. I didn't have much with me. And I made it most of the way through my journey, I'd say 4/5 or so of the journey. And I landed at a private airstrip here in Sterling to visit my friend that I was going hunting with and exchange some stuff and things for the hunt that we were planning. And when I took off, I leveled out at about 1,000 feet or so. It was a beautiful bluebird day, and 4th of July, everybody's out and having barbecues and stuff. So I made a turn and started heading south and was looking at everybody on their porches and, you know, wagging my wings at the kids and people floating on the river. And it was your perfect Alaskan day of flying. I remember I had pulled the throttle back and I was probably cruising at 80 or 85 miles an hour, fairly slow. I wasn't working it real hard. My RPMs were fairly low. And had it trimmed out for cruise flight. And I remember I heard and I think I felt a little pop. Of course, immediately the mechanic in me was trying to figure out what that was. First thing I thought was maybe an inspection panel. And so of course you look at your wings on both sides and don't see anything there. But I noticed that as soon as the pop happened, the airplane attitude pitched down just a little bit. So of course, as a pilot would, that's not what I wanted to do, so you pull back on the yoke a little bit. But the attitude of the airplane didn't change. And that's when I said, okay, well there's a problem here, we got an issue. And it seemed to be that I had aileron, seemed to be that I had rudder, because if you don't have rudder in a Pacer, you know it rather quickly. But the elevator authority wasn't there. Now, what was causing the elevator to have its lack of authority, I didn't know. And I remember I looked over my shoulder and you can see just barely the tip of the elevator. And I pulled back on the yoke and the elevator moved, just like it should. To me, that's a good indication that all my cables are good. The mechanic in me again running through the checklist of what it could be. But I was still pitched down a little bit and I was still losing altitude. And at that point I knew I was going to be landing somewhere. When you're at 1,000 feet, you don't have a whole bunch of time to think, you don't have a whole bunch of time to react, and these Pacers aren't known for their glide ratio. So when it started descending, it was a clock and it was running out. And I looked in front of me and to the left and I saw a big marshy field. Well, if I land there, I'm gonna flip upside down, and then I'm gonna have to get a helicopter and they're gonna have to helicopter me out. That doesn't sound like a good idea. And I said, well, I've landed on gravel bars before, and there's a river right in front of me that crosses me. Maybe I'll land there. So I look down and I see a bunch of boats in the river, and there's really no gravel bars to be had. There's power lines, there's trees, there's houses, and there's rafters. So that's probably not a good idea either. And I looked off 90 degrees to my right, and I saw a residential road, 1 lane each way, and it was pretty curvy. But I saw the trees in front of it, saw some trees at the end of it, and it kind of turned out of sight. And I estimated it to be 800-900 feet if I used all of the curves and was able to put down where I wanted to and used it all. And that's plenty for what I need for my skills and what this airplane's capable of. And I'd been flying a lot that summer, so I was very proficient with the airplane. And again, I was light, so everything was in my favor. So I started to make that right turn, and I made a Mayday call on 121.5 as well as a common frequency. It wasn't even something I thought about. It just instinctually happened. And that's thanks to my private pilot training on emergency procedures. I'm sure it wasn't textbook. I said something along the lines of, Mayday, 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 white and blue pacer, November 3604 Alpha, going down south of Soldotna Airport near the river. And I had an inReach, and I always keep my inReach on my person instead of connected to the airplane, because if you're alive and need to push the button, it's best if it's on you. And I remember thinking back, okay, should I push the SOS button on this? And I said, well, there's people right here, so I'm not gonna push the SOS button. And I was wearing a flight helmet, and I had shoulder harnesses on, and I tightened up my shoulder harness, and I made my turn, and I knew that I needed to get down at the beginning of my runway, the residential road, because if I floated at all, I was gonna run out of runway. But the problem was I had tall spruce trees in front of me. And in the backcountry, and anywhere else, you've got a multitude of skills that you can use. You've got a couple of different tricks up your sleeve, if you will. And one of my favorite is just forward slip and then even it out and flare and land. But I knew I had some sort of control issue, so I didn't feel comfortable that I could forward slip and be able to straighten it out and make the landing. So instead of forward slipping, I said, well, I've got good brakes on this thing, and if I have to nose it over or if I have to put it in the ditch to not run into a car, I can. I'll pull the mixture to get the prop stopped so I don't damage the engine, which looking back wasn't the right move, but hindsight's 20/20. Because at the time I still assumed that I was doing an emergency landing. And I felt that I had the skills to be able to do so. However, I'd never practiced that before, which was my downfall. So looking back, no, it was completely the wrong move. It didn't help me at all. So I said, well, I'll pull the mixture and I'll get right over the trees and I'll nose down and then I'll aggressively flare back to bleed the speed and then I can touch down. I have big tires, so even if it's a harder landing, the big tires will absorb a lot of the impact and we'll be able to get stopped. What I didn't realize is I had airflow on the bottom of the tail giving me down elevator, but I didn't have airflow over the top of the elevator to give me up elevator. So instead of descending at a constant rate that I couldn't change, I exacerbated it by pushing down and made it a steeper angle of descent, and then didn't have any way to be able to do that extreme flare that I wanted to reduce the descent and touch down. And if I had 2 miles of runway in front of me, no problem. I could have made that work, but I had, 700 or 800 feet. And I came in hard and I kept it square and I had it centered and I drove it all the way to the crash site, as they say. I remember the main tires hitting and feeling the absorption of the big tires. I had 29-inch bush tires that honestly is probably the best safety piece that I had on it, surprisingly enough. But I remember they absorbed impact and then almost instantly the belly of the airplane was on the ground and there was a loud sliding, crunching cheese grater sound. And the left wingtip touched a fairly small spruce tree on the side at slow, maybe 15 miles an hour. And it was just enough that it pitched the airplane around. And this guy, mid-20s, it's 4th of July, and he's got his American flag board shorts on, and he's got a beer in his hand, opens the door to his house to seeing me sliding sideways up to his front door. And I remember he stopped and he kind of looked around like, is this happening? how many beers did I have? And he came out and he's like, you okay? And I kind of yelled at him through the airplane. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine, no problem. I stepped away from the airplane, and it's one of those that you look at yourself and you say, okay, I'm not bleeding. Everything seems to be working. And you look at the airplane and your heart just sinks. And I'm like, okay, this is gonna change everything. What I later on learned after I was at the crash site and looking at the airplane is that the fabric above the windshield, right at the top of your head pretty much, had come loose and had ballooned up. And it came up maybe 2 inches. And that was enough with the short-bodied pacer that it disrupts the airflow over the top of the airplane and then disrupts the airflow over the top of the elevator, giving you a lack of elevator authority in the upward position. This is an issue on other fabric-covered airplanes as well. You can have that in a Cub or, a Citabria or whatever else as well, but from what I've read and what I understand is the tail is further back from the fuselage, quite a bit more than the pacer. Therefore, you've got more time for that air to get laminar over the tail and you have better elevator authority. But the pacer being stubby and short, you get all that turbulent air over the top of the fuselage and there's really no hope for it. It's a known issue, but I don't know that it's known enough. No, I know that it's not known enough. It needs to be understood a little bit better. There is an AD that is out there that relates with it, and the AD reads something like, if you have cotton or linen fabrics, you have to add a metal strip that's 2 inches wide probably and goes the length of the windshield, and it helps hold that fabric down. Most pacers have that, or if you have a skylight, it's null and void anyways. However, when I bought my airplane and was going through A&P school, I was reading up on the logbooks of my airplane while I was reading up or learning up on FARs and logbooks in school. And I remember reading that AD, and it specifically says cotton or linen fabrics. If you have any of the other stitz or polyfiber or whatnot, the AD doesn't apply. So I looked through my logbooks and showed them to some instructors, and sure enough, I've got legacy fabric. It was recovered a multitude of times, all in the 70s and 80s and whatnot. So I don't have cotton or linen, that AD doesn't apply. A couple of things that a person could do that I think would make the outcome better would be adding throttle to get the nose to pitch up. Another thing that you could likely do is add a little bit of flaps.
Did you have flaps in?
I did not have flaps in. I was going faster than I wanted to, and I should have had flaps, but things were happening so fast, I did as much as I could do, and flaps weren't one of them. And then you've got trim. You've got elevator trim in the pacer, and it's worth a shot messing with the elevator trim to see if you can get it to trim out. As soon as I was able to slow down and understand what had happened, I started thinking about what it was that allowed me to walk away from it. And I differentiate that into 2 different categories. I guess 3. But skills and the knowledge base that you have to be able to get you through whatever emergency it is. Then you've got the equipment and the airplane itself as a safety mechanism. And then you've got luck. The skill set that I had built up was I probably have more landings on gravel strips and gravel bars on the river than I do on pavement. And the skill set of being able to look out your window and see a place that isn't an airstrip and say, yeah, I can land there. That's probably the biggest thing in my head that allowed me to do it. And then secondly, it was proficiency of my airplane. I knew how to make it do what I needed it to do, and I made it happen. And if you're not proficient with it, it doesn't matter if you're in a $300,000 carbon Cub. If you don't know how to fly it, it's not going to do you any good. The second thing that I truly believe helped me walk away from this accident in my specific case was my 29-inch Alaska bush wheels. I came in pretty hard and pretty steep, and the Pacer isn't known to have a whole bunch of suspension travel. but I was lightly loaded, didn't have a whole ton of fuel. I probably had half tanks. And I had 7 pounds of pressure in my 29-inch bush wheels. And that 7 pounds of pressure in the bush wheels absorbed a lot of the impact. And then the bungees did their thing, and then the seat and the springs from 1953 did their thing, and then the metal of the gear legs and the fuselage and stuff started giving way, and then the frame of the Pacer saved the rest. And luckily by that point there wasn't a whole ton of energy left. So it was the bush wheels and the Pacer itself that allowed me to go fishing the next day. The third thing here, I got lucky enough that there was a road. There was a seemingly golden paved lane for me to land on. I felt like this story needs sharing because if it can save one person from having even a minor mishap, it's worth it. I firmly believe that knowledge needs to be shared. So if I can get people to start looking at the top of their windshield at that fabric every time they fuel the airplane, every time they pre-flight, every time they land somewhere, and look for changes. Look for the metal strip coming up if you've got it. Look for the fabric coming up if you don't. Buy the metal strip if you don't. Put in a skylight. If I can get more attention to be made to that area of the airplane, we could potentially keep it from causing damage or death or injury to somebody. And on top of that, hopefully people, if they hear or feel that pop like I did, they can handle it in a way even better than I did. So if I can increase the knowledge base of pilots and owners and mechanics everywhere, it just makes the whole thing safer. And that's what we're all about. So the airplane's getting rebuilt pretty substantially. However, it's still a factory Pacer fuselage for the most part. I added some strengthening into it because I use it pretty hard. But it's not a stretched Pacer like some experimentals and a couple certified are. The wings are, for the most part, all factory. They're squared off, and it gives me a little more surface area, but it's a fairly common thing. It's still a Pacer wing. The engine is still an 0320, it was before, and it will stay that now with no modifications really to it. The modifications that I have put on it, or that I am putting on it, otherwise are pretty substantial. It's getting a left side door that's a seaplane door, so you can get in and out of it easier and you don't have to crawl over somebody. The right side door is becoming a seaplane door, again for same reasons. It's getting float fittings, so then I can utilize those seaplane doors. And I've got Eddie Trimmer's STC, so it's modified Super Cub gear, which is stronger and gives me a little more width and a few other things. Putting Super Cub PA-18 tail feathers on it, which I'm really excited about. The Pacer from the nose on, if there is like an animated picture of an airplane that's wrecked and it looking sad, it's exactly what that looked like. Because the wings were like all drooped and the tires were up, and it's just like, it just has this instant mechanical frowny face, like, it's wrecked, and it knows it's wrecked, and you know it's wrecked.